Nippon Paint wasn't born from a business ambition, but from a response to death. In 1800s Japan, people were dying from toxic makeup, and one student, not a scientist, decided enough was enough. Back then, no one could have predicted that his fight against toxic makeup would grow into Asia's biggest paint empire, spreading across more than 30 countries and pulling in billions. This is the insane story of how one man's obsession against poison sparked a global paint revolution. Buckle up, because the rise of Nippon Paint is nothing short of legendary. Behind that obsession was a student with no skills, no chemistry degree, just a mission. That student was Jujiro Moteki, a determined scholar from Keio Gijuku Public School, who would go on to study at Keisei School in 1878, which later part became the University of Tokyo. But the real spark didn't come from the classroom. It came from his brother, Haruta Moteki, an English teacher who spent his free time translating Western chemistry books. Someone had come up to him with a pressing request. He asked if he could create a safer white makeup powder, made in Japan and free from poison. At the time, lead poisoning from makeup was a silent epidemic, especially among women using oshiroi, a traditional white face powder to create a mask-like appearance for beauty. And in 1878, Haruta stumbled upon an idea that would change everything. He discovered that countries like France and the US were replacing toxic lead in cosmetics with zinc oxide, a much safer alternative. Bursting with excitement over his groundbreaking discovery and recognizing its potential impact, he contacted his brother Jujiro about this rare chance to produce zinc oxide in Japan. He believed this could solve a critical health issue and make a real difference. But they were up against everything. They had no lab, no equipment, and no industry backing. Chemistry was still in its infancy in Japan. Every experiment was manual, and every setback was costly. They repeatedly failed to synthesize zinc oxide that met safe and usable standards. The materials were expensive, and the knowledge gap between Japan and the West was wide. And skepticism from society was unrelenting. Who would trust two brothers with no scientific credentials to solve a national health crisis? Still, Jujiro didn't give up. After countless failures, restarts, and nearly running out of money, Jujiro finally had a breakthrough in 1879. Finally, a formula worked. Using simple lab tools and imported zinc ore, they managed to make zinc oxide, a white powder that was much safer than lead. This was an unprecedented feat at the time. But they didn't stop there. They blended the zinc oxide with natural oils and other safe ingredients to create a paste-type wet paint. It was non-toxic, easier to apply, and gave Japanese consumers a much-needed safe alternative to the dangerous lead-based makeup that was harming so many. Their hard work didn't go unnoticed. The Japanese government saw the value of this innovation and awarded them a special pharmaceutical license to use zinc oxide, not just in cosmetics, but also in medicines to treat burns and heat rashes. It finally seemed like things were turning around. But even with this major step forward, reality set in. Producing zinc oxide was very expensive. Research costs were high. Equipment was costly. The potential profits might not be high enough to make the whole project worth the risk. Plus, the product could only be sold to a small market in cosmetics and medicine. With mounting debts and limited sales, Jujiro found himself at a crossroads. Just when things looked most uncertain, an unexpected opportunity appeared. A moment that had the power to change everything. One day, in the heart of Tokyo's fast-growing industrial district, the Finance Ministry's printing bureau hit a major roadblock. They needed to improve the quality of their vermilion ink pads, widely used for official seals across Japan. The key to this upgrade? A rare ingredient: high-purity zinc oxide, vital for creating smooth, vibrant ink. At first, the Bureau tried producing the zinc oxide themselves, but achieving the level of purity and consistency required proved to be more complex than expected. Their equipment and expertise just weren't enough. That's when they turned to Jujiro Moteki, a name quietly gaining respect in chemical circles. Despite running a small operation, Jujiro had developed a reputation for producing exceptionally pure zinc oxide through his meticulous Western-inspired processes. His formula met all the specifications the government needed. The printing bureau placed a large-scale official order, and this contract became a turning point in Jujiro's journey. The income from this government deal gave him something he had never had before: financial stability. It allowed him to stop worrying about survival and start thinking about innovation. For Jujiro, that meant turning his full attention toward his passion, creating modern oil-based Western-style paints, which were more durable and efficient than traditional Japanese coatings. But Jujiro wasn't just driven by innovation. His research revealed a bigger issue. Japan was relying almost entirely on foreign imports for paint, especially from Britain and Germany. This dependence not only made Japan vulnerable to supply disruptions, but also left its industries and infrastructure at a disadvantage. Jujiro saw an opportunity and a responsibility. He believed Japan could produce paints that were just as advanced, just as reliable, and proudly made it home. And so, with determination, funding, and a vision for a self-reliant Japan, Jujiro Moteki began the next chapter of what would become the Nippon Paint legacy. You see, the 1870s marked the dawn of Japan's civilization and enlightenment. After ending over 250 years of national isolation under the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan finally opened up to the world during the Meiji Restoration. The government pushed rapid modernization to catch up with the West. Western architecture, science, and industry weren't just trends, they were essential. Jujiro Moteki, a student during this time, was right in the middle of this transformation. In Tokyo, wooden houses were being rebuilt using brick and stone to prevent fire. In areas like Hibiya and Ginza, Western-style government buildings and banks rose, inspired by French and British designs. Iron bridges replaced old wooden ones, and steamships with steel hulls began arriving at ports like Yokohama and Kobe. Japan even built its first railway between Tokyo and Yokohama in 1872. Proof that the old ways were being replaced by new technology. Fast. These marvels needed something more than steel and stone. They needed coatings that could withstand Japan's humid climate, salty coastlines, and heavy rains. Paints suddenly became more than just aesthetic. They became vital to construction, shielding metal from corrosion, preserving wood from decay, and visually marking Japan's leap into modernity. But Japan faced a serious limitation. There were no domestic companies that could produce paints that matched the quality of Western imports. Traditional Japanese finishes, such as urushi lacquer, though beautiful, weren't suited for the demands of industrial infrastructure, and Japan didn't yet have the chemical know-how to produce Western-style paints in volume. Japan in the 1870s was entirely dependent on imported paints for its industrial and military needs. Western paints had specific chemical properties: linseed oil as a base, zinc oxide or lead carbonate as pigments, and metal dryers that accelerated curing times. They lasted longer, resisted salt and humidity better, and adhered more smoothly to metal and wood. Japanese craftsmen and builders needed these features, but had no choice but to pay premium prices for foreign imports. He observed British red lead paint arriving by ship in barrels at Yokohama port, marked for government buildings and warships. These imports were expensive, costing up to 3 times more than what domestic production might have achieved. Worse, the pigments didn't always suit Japan's environment. Moisture seeped beneath layers, leading to corrosion, especially in coastal regions. Jujiro Moteki saw this growing demand firsthand. Builders, shipwrights, and even government officials were desperate for affordable, locally produced paints that could match or exceed imported quality. Moteki knew the only way forward was rigorous experimentation and research. With a stable income from the Finance Ministry's zinc oxide contract, he converted a section of his workshop into a makeshift research lab. There, he began studying samples of imported paints, grinded pigments by hand using a mortar and pestle, and tried to reverse engineer their formula. He sourced raw linseed oil and zinc oxide through newly opened trade channels, imported small glass flasks and grinders for pigment mixing, and used hand-built kilns to process minerals into usable paint bases. He reverse-engineered foreign paint samples, trying to replicate their durability. Many early attempts failed. Paints that dried too slowly, faded in sunlight, or cracked with time. One of such experiments he tested was using linseed oil blends on wooden planks, leaving them outside through rainstorms to check for peeling. Notebook entries found in Moteki's personal archive, now held at the Nippon Paint Holdings Museum, detail experiments comparing lead carbonate with zinc oxide as a white base. He annotated them with careful observations. Zinc resists yellowing. Dry time? Slower, but more stable. He logged every failure meticulously in notebooks, tweaking ratios by the gram, adjusting heating times by the minute, often working through the night with limited equipment. To break the language barrier, Moteki even hired a translator to help him interpret German technical manuals on industrial chemistry, as many of the advanced paint-making techniques were still locked behind language barriers. When he finally managed to produce a paint that dried in under 12 hours and resisted peeling in coastal air, he knew he was onto something truly valuable. This wasn't luck. It was groundbreaking chemistry, built from scratch in a country with no previous blueprint. Furthermore, Moteki's paints were not only cheaper, but could withstand the humid Japanese climate and salty coastal air, qualities essential to a rapidly industrializing island nation. Moteki's ambition wasn't merely industrial. It was patriotic. He was determined to outperform the West. He once wrote in a personal letter dated 1882, "If we must paint the face of modern Japan, let it be with our own hands, not foreign brushes." Back in the late 1800s, Japan relied heavily on imported Western paints to support its modernization. These paints, mostly from Europe, were expensive. But worse, they opened the door for dishonest merchants. Some would water down imported paint, repackage it, and sell it at high prices. The results? Low quality, often peeling quickly, offer poor protection, and can sometimes be unsafe. Jujiro Moteki refused to follow that path. "I want to make paints that are of comparable quality to Western ones," he pledged. With his earlier success in zinc oxide production, Moteki committed himself to a tougher challenge, creating Japan's first Western-style paints, ones people could trust and use safely. The start was tough. In their first year, the company sold just 250 gallons of paint, barely enough to cover costs. Traditional builders stuck to familiar urushi lacquer, avoiding unfamiliar Western products. Still, Moteki didn't give up. He visited job sites himself, offering free demonstrations, showing the strength of his paint, and personally guaranteeing its quality. It was slow going, but builders began to notice. Then in 1880, after months of experiments and setbacks, Jujiro finally did it. He became the first person in Japan to develop a paint designed specifically for Japan's weather and building materials. Word of Jujiro Moteki's work spread fast. In 1881, he was invited by Japan's Ministry of Agriculture and Commerce to showcase his products at the Second National Industrial Exhibition in Ueno Park, Tokyo. It was the biggest tech and trade event in the country, where Japan showed off its best inventions and industrial progress to the world. Over 800,000 people attended, including top government leaders, foreign diplomats, and business owners. Jujiro's small booth stood out. He brought jars of his homemade zinc oxide and paint panels that showed off the smooth finish and bright white color. Visitors were amazed, and government judges took notice. His zinc oxide was crystal white, finely grounded, and lab-tested for purity, free from lead, arsenic, and other harmful metals. Ideal for paints, facial powders, and skin products. His paint? Durable, smooth, easy to apply, and crafted entirely with local materials and techniques. No one expected a tiny workshop to match or even surpass the quality of expensive Western imports. But it did, and that moment changed everything. He was awarded a special commendation by the ministry for pushing Japan's chemical industry forward. a recognition that he had created something truly important for the country's future. Heikichi Nakagawa, the man in charge of coatings for the Japanese Imperial Navy, saw Motoki's exhibit and was amazed by the durability of his paints. Impressed by their potential for use on warships, he made a bold proposal to Motoki: "Partner with me to make Japan's first marine paints." And Motoki accepted. You see, while other companies were cutting corners, Motoki's commitment to quality earned him this major contract with the Navy, finally giving the company the financial backing it desperately needed. That same year, in 1881, they co-founded Komyosha, which later became Nippon Paint Holdings. Their mission? Create strong, weather-resistant paints that could protect Japanese ships, which were vital to a country surrounded by ocean. In 1881, after proving its strength in harsh marine conditions, Nippon Paint became the official supplier for the Imperial Japanese Navy. His paints covered everything from fast patrol boats to large steel battleships, trusted to hold up against salt, waves, and war. But Japan's hunger for paint was growing on land too. In the late 1880s, Japan began building a new imperial palace in Tokyo. It wasn't just a symbol of power, it sparked a construction boom. Suddenly, private builders and architects needed modern paints for homes, schools, and government offices. Jujiro moved fast. He expanded his product line, offering paints not only for ships, but for homes and businesses. This move helped stabilize his young company and meet the growing demand. In 1896, he met Hatsutaro Tasaka, a respected investor who shared his vision. With new funding, Jujiro built a cutting-edge paint factory in Shinagawa, Tokyo. It became the largest paint production facility in Japan, capable of handling both industrial-scale and specialty orders. But he didn't stop at making more paint. He wanted to make it better. In 1897, after years of refining his zinc oxide process, he received a patent for the world's purest zinc oxide purification technique. His formula produced a powder so fine and stable that it became a standard for use in both industrial coatings and medical products. By 1898, with growing demand and more supporters, Jujiro officially incorporated the company as Nippon Paint Manufacturing Company Limited. Tasaka became the first president, and Jujiro continued as the driving force behind research and development. But the real pressure came roaring in from Japan's booming transport sector: railroads, steamships, and factories, all desperate for specialized paints tough enough to survive speed, salt, and steel. So in 1905, Jujiro opened a second major factory in Osaka, close to Japan's major shipping ports and shipyards, to handle growing orders. Still, one big problem remained. Ship-bottom paints, essential for protecting hulls from salt water, rust, and marine organisms, were all imported. These foreign paints were expensive and didn't always perform well in Japan's coastal waters. Remember in 1881, where the Navy challenged Jujiro Motoki to fix this and spark the birth of Komyosha? So for decades, Jujiro and his team had been working side by side with Japanese naval engineers. They ran real-time experiments, tested formulas on scrap metal submerged in seawater, tracked how much barnacle growth occurred, modified the ingredients until they worked, and tested experiments with numerous anti-corrosion and anti-fouling formulations. After nearly 30 years of relentless experimentation, collaboration, and innovation, their work finally paid off. By the early 1910s, Nippon Paint successfully developed Japan's first anti-fouling marine paint for ship bottoms, one that protected ships from rust and kept them smooth, fast, and fuel-efficient. It wasn't just innovation, it was a breakthrough that helped build Japan's modern navy and maritime strength. He then went on to secure a patent for this anti-fouling marine paint in 1911. This was a huge feat, because you see, ships at the time struggled with marine growth. Barnacles and algae stuck to hulls, creating drag and corrosion. The Navy were tired of relying on expensive imported paints and needed a better solution. But just as Nippon Paint reached new heights, a storm was brewing. Because the next challenge wasn't technological, it was economic. After World War I ended in 1918, Japan experienced a short economic boom. But just 2 years later, that growth turned into a depression. You see, during World War I, Japan's economy grew rapidly by exporting goods to war-torn Europe and Asia. Factories expanded, and new businesses popped up. After the war ended in 1920, demand for Japanese exports dropped suddenly. Overproduction, falling prices, and shrinking global trade caused chaos. Survival, not innovation, became their next battle. Like many businesses, Nippon Paint manufacturing struggled badly. For the first time since its founding in 1898, the company reported a financial loss. Jujiro's earlier expansion plans, which had helped the company grow, now backfired. The business was now on the edge of bankruptcy. In its darkest hour, Jujiro turned to his business networks and reached out to Genosuke Obata, a seasoned reformer, an ex-Yamaguchi bank executive, to help save the sinking ship. Obata understood this wasn't just a numbers problem, it was a people problem, and he acted fast. His first move? Radical restructuring. Obata began by shutting down non-core businesses, including the zinc oxide purification line, the iron oxide factory, and other unprofitable divisions. He shifted the company's focus to its strongest assets, paints and pigments. Production was centered in Tokyo and Osaka, the two industrial hubs most vital to Japan's economy. He also moved the company's head office to Osaka, a strategic decision that placed it closer to Japan's industrial clients and ports. Obata's most profound change, however, wasn't structural. It was cultural. He believed deeply in unity between leadership and labor. "A business is the people that comprise it," he said. "Unless we stabilize the hearts of our employees and restore trust, we cannot overcome this crisis." At a time when labor disputes were erupting across Japan, Obata took a different path. Instead of fighting workers or cutting them out, he promoted mutual prosperity. His idea was simple: capital and labor must share responsibility and reward equally. And he followed through. He did something almost no company in Japan had ever done. He made the company's entire financial records public to employees, including profits, losses, and even executive salaries. This level of transparency shocked many in the business world. Then came his boldest move yet. In 1920, he introduced Japan's first profit-sharing program. Workers who had stayed through the downturn didn't just keep their jobs. They received a share of the company's profits as thanks. And this approach had an immediate impact. Employees, feeling ownership and pride, began working with renewed energy. Teams collaborated more closely. Morale improved. Within just a few years, by the mid-1920s, Nippon Paint had not only recovered, it had outpaced its rivals, becoming one of Japan's top industrial manufacturers again. Obata's philosophy laid the groundwork for modern Japanese labor relations, decades before concepts like lifetime employment became national norms. As Japan began its political and military expansion across Asia in the 1930s, Nippon Paint found itself at a major crossroads. The company, which had once focused on making safe paints for homes and ships, was now drawn into a new era, one driven by war, nationalism, and overseas growth. Government contracts increased, and the company was asked to support infrastructure and military projects beyond Japan's borders. These were high-stakes decisions. Every move carried risk, but it wasn't just about paint anymore. It was about surviving and evolving in an unpredictable time. For the business Jujiro Moteki started in a humble Tokyo workshop in 1881, this period marked a turning point. The 1930s ushered in a bold new era. Nippon Paint was no longer content with just Japan. In 1933, they set up Nichiman Paint in Liaoning, China. Taiwan followed in 1940, then Tianjin in 1942. With each move, the company grew deeper into Japan's occupied territories, riding the wave of imperial expansion. Nippon Paint was becoming a regional powerhouse. But that momentum was about to be tested by war, loss, and the collapse of an empire. During World War II in 1945, Nippon Paint's central production plant in Osaka was reduced to ashes during U.S. air raids, a devastating blow to its core manufacturing operations. The loss was massive, both financially and emotionally. But they didn't wait to recover. By 1948, just 3 years later, they launched the Kozuchi Kai, a strategic alliance of trusted paint retailers across Japan. This network helped rebuild their distribution system from the ground up. It was a smart move. Japan was heading into its period of rapid post-war economic growth, and demand for homes, schools, factories, and paint was about to surge. The real breakthrough came in 1962. That year, Nippon Paint partnered with Singaporean entrepreneur Goh Ching Liang, who founded Wuthalum Holdings. He had started a small paint shop in 1955 and become their main local distributor. Recognizing the massive growth potential in Southeast Asia, they formed the NIPC Management Group, a 60-40 joint venture, with Goh holding 60% and Nippon Paint holding 40%. The timing was perfect. In the early 1960s, Southeast Asia was booming. New housing, offices, schools, and factories were popping up across Singapore, Malaysia, and beyond. Nippon Paint's modern coatings were exactly what these fast-developing cities needed. Under Goh's leadership, and with Nippon Paint's technical support, the NIPC Group rapidly expanded. Over the following decades, it would grow to become one of the largest and most profitable divisions of the entire Nippon Paint brand. In 1965, Nippon Paint opened its first overseas manufacturing plant in Singapore, marking a major milestone in its international journey. This was more than just a factory. It was the company's first step in localizing production for Southeast Asian markets, reducing reliance on Japanese exports. The move was followed quickly by further expansion: Thailand and Malaysia in 1967, and later the Philippines in 1976. In each of these countries, Nippon Paint built regional plants and worked with local distributors to tailor paint formulas to local climates and construction needs. Back in Japan, the firm wasn't slowing down. In 1968, Nippon Paint opened its research center in Neyagawa, Osaka. And one of its biggest breakthroughs? Heat-reflective paint, which reflects sunlight and keeps buildings cooler, especially designed for tropical climates. Today, this invention is keeping buildings cool across the globe. In Singapore, it's used on hospitals and schools to cut surface heat. In India, it's helping tin roof homes stay up to 5 degrees Celsius cooler. Indonesia saw building temps drop by 10 degrees Celsius. And in Vietnam, nano-based versions cool oil tanks and fishing boats by up to 19 degrees Celsius. Japan uses it on roads to cut surface heat by up to 14 degrees Celsius. Pakistan applied it to its presidential palace to lower energy use, and Australia uses it on homes and commercial buildings to beat the heat. Later in the 1970s, Nippon Paint made a power move, signing technology-sharing agreements with 2 global giants to level up its game. With PPG Industries from the US, they unlocked cutting-edge car paint technology that uses electricity to apply paint evenly on cars, making them more rust-resistant and easier to produce. Then, with International Paint from the UK, they created a special self-polishing marine coating that slowly wears off in water, preventing barnacles and dirt from sticking to ship bottoms, reduces drag, and burns less fuel significantly. These smart partnerships gave Nippon Paint the tools to lead in both the automotive and marine worlds. Domestically, the 1970s saw a building boom in Japan, and Nippon Paint kept pace by opening new production plants in Aichi, Tochigi, and Okayama, strategically placed near industrial zones to support growing demand. But the real game changer came in 1975. That year, Nippon Paint made its boldest move yet, launching America Nippon Paint Company Limited and stepping straight into the heart of the world's most competitive market. Now they were no longer just an Asian manufacturer. They were ready to challenge the Western giants on their home turf. By its 100th anniversary in 1981, Nippon Paint had grown from a tiny Tokyo workshop into a global powerhouse, with operations across Asia, Europe, and North America. And they weren't slowing down. By 1990, they were pouring 3 billion yen, which is around $22 million into R&D each year, leading Japan's paint industry in innovation with one of the largest R&D budgets in the Japanese paint industry at the time. That investment paid off. In the early 90s, they launched a self-cleaning exterior paint, engineered with surface chemistry that repelled dirt and slashed maintenance costs. The result? A runaway hit. In its first year alone, it brought in over 10 billion yen, about $75 million. a record-breaking launch for a single product in the company's history. But the biggest prize was still ahead: China. As the Chinese economy opened up in the 1990s, Nippon Paint moved fast, seizing the chance to tap into a booming market. It wasn't just growth, it was a gold rush. China would soon become Nippon Paint's largest and most profitable market, the engine driving its rise to global dominance. In 1992, Nippon Paint made a bold but strategic decision. They entered China by establishing Nippon Paint China Company Limited, at a time when the country's economy was just beginning to open to the world. But instead of rushing in like many foreign companies, Nippon Paint played the long game. Instead of expanding too quickly, they opened a single site in Guangdong in 1994, which is close to Hong Kong and right in the heart of a booming special economic zone. This gave them time to study the market, adjust to China's hot, humid climate, and fine-tune their formulas to local construction needs. This thoughtful phased strategy paid off in a big way. What started with just one small plant became a sprawling network of 30 factories by 2020, supplying everything from decorative coatings for homes to protective coatings for factories, pipelines, and public infrastructure. Today, China isn't just another market. It's Nippon Paint's largest, pulling in over $3.6 billion a year through its Nipsey China brand Libong, one of the most trusted and recognized paint brands in the country. But they didn't stop with China. Later in 1994, Nippon Paint set its sights on Vietnam, seeing early on that this rising nation would soon need premium coatings for a wave of new homes, factories, bridges, and office skyscrapers. Once again, they were ahead of the curve. In 2014, something big happened behind the scenes at one of now Japan's oldest companies. Nippon Paint rebranded as Nippon Paint Holdings Company Limited, transforming from a Japanese industrial icon into a global holding powerhouse. Leaner, faster, and ready to compete with the world's biggest brands. And they didn't waste time acquiring its competitors. In 2016, they acquired US paint brand Dunn Edwards. Then in 2019, they snapped up Deluxe Group in Australia and Bedik Boya in Turkey. But the real shakeup came in 2020. WWII Group, their longtime Singaporean partner since 1962, raised its stake in the entire global company of Nippon Paint Holdings from 39% to 58.7%, becoming the majority shareholder. A 140-year-old Japanese brand, now led by a Singapore-based group? Yes, and it wasn't a takeover. It was a strategic alliance built on trust since their first collaboration in 1962. Today, Nippon Paint operates in over 30 countries, delivering cutting-edge coatings to serve homes, cars, ships, smartphones, medical tech, and more. Their R&D labs are behind bacteria-killing coatings, heat-reflective paints, self-cleaning surfaces, corrosion-resistant marine coatings, and beyond. These technologies prove that paint, when done right, is powerful science. And through it all, they still follow founder Jujiro Motoki's 1881 vision. Paint should improve lives, not just walls. Every employee still trains under that philosophy. Every product still carries that purpose. So what's your take? Did handing the reins to WWII power global growth? Or was it a step too far from Nippon Paint's roots? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories like this, hit subscribe and turn on that bell. We've got more business legends coming your way.